Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would enter into the Holy of Holies. And this was the only time of the year in which the high priest was allowed to enter into this Holy of Holies. And it required a procedure. He would have the bull of sin offering, he'd have the goat of sin offering, this scapegoat, and he'd take this blood from the bull, also blood from the goat, and he would take also the coals from the altar and incense, and he'd go into the holy place, and he would put the incense on the fire, and the smoke from the incense would fill up the Holy of Holies. And he wasn't allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies until the smoke had filled up the Holy of Holies from this incense offered. And then he would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would sprinkle the blood of the bull on the east side of the mercy seat 7 times. And then he'd also sprinkle that blood or in front of the mercy seat 7 times. And then he'd get the blood of the goat and do the same thing and sprinkle the blood 7 times on the east side of the mercy seat and 7 times before the mercy seat. And then he would leave the Holy of Holies, and then he would go to the altar, and then also he would apply blood there and make atonement for the altar as well. And then he would release the scapegoat into the wilderness. And there was this long process involved that allowed this high priest to enter into the Holy of Holies. And not only did he have to offer up sacrifices for the sins of the people, but the sacrifices for himself, and so on and so forth. But this was the process by which he would enter in. He'd also cleanse himself before even going through the process. He would have on these holy garments, his linen garments, and he would bathe himself in water, and then put on these garments. And it wasn't until he had cleansed himself with the water that he was able to go through this procedure and enter into the Holy of Holies. And this whole process really is used by the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 10 in our reading today to talk about the access that we have to the Holy of Holies. And basically what the Hebrew writer does is tell us that we are kind of like the high priests who are able to enter into the Holy of Holies, and not only just enter into it like once a year and then leave, but we get to abide in the Holy of Holies. We get to draw near, and we also get to cling to God there in the Holy of Holies, because the new and living way has opened up to us, not in the way that required a physical tabernacle and the blood of bulls and goats and all of these different things. But we have Jesus Christ, who has opened up the way for us to enter into the Holy of Holies, so that we can draw near with confidence, with boldness, and we can cling to God throughout the ups and downs of life and be drawn close to Him. This is how it's spoken or written in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 19. Therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, not the blood of bulls and goats, as the Hebrew writer has talked about, but by the blood of Jesus. Perfect blood, and also human blood that we talked about in a previous devotion. So we have confidence to enter into the Holy of Holies, something the high priest could only do once a year, but we have access to the Holy of Holies, even though we are not high priests, although we are not of the descendants of Aaron. We all have the blood of Christ, though, that gives us access to this Holy of Holies. And it's, as verse 20 says, by a new and living way, which He inaugurated for us through the veil, that is, His flesh. If you remember, in the Gospel of John, Jesus said that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And that's definitely true. The Holy of Holies was the place in which Yahweh Himself was abiding, and you had the Shekinah glory there between the mercy seat, and the high priest could draw near only once a year with the blood of bulls and goats, but with the blood of Christ, we get to draw near with confidence, with boldness, and we do it through the veil. And the veil was His own flesh, Jesus Christ's flesh. The interesting thing about the veil that separated the holy place and the Holy of Holies was that it was a fine twisted linen. It was of blue, purple, and scarlet material. And all of these, and it also had cherubim on it. And all of this describes Jesus Christ. And Jesus reveals himself in all of the aspects of the veil. The fine twisted linen representing his righteousness. As we read in the book of Revelation, we talked about the bride coming down, and she has on these linen garments, and it specifically says the linen garments were the righteous acts of the saints. And linen symbolizes righteousness, and Christ was one who came in righteousness. And then the blue symbolizes the heavenly aspect of Christ. He came from heaven and became a man, humbled himself, and took on the form of a servant in human flesh. But he was a heavenly person, which is symbolized by the blue. And then the purple symbolizes the royalty of Christ. He came as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then the red symbolizes his redemption. Of course, being similar to the color of blood, the blood that he offered for our redemption. So the veil was really, and then also the cherubim, I might add, could symbolize the glory that Jesus had, especially once he ascended after he was buried, after he died and was buried and raised again and then ascended into heaven. He returned back to the glory that he once had, and the cherubim might symbolize the glory. But all these different things are symbolized by the veil. Christ in his righteousness, Christ as the heavenly man, Christ as the kingly man, we could say, Christ as the Redeemer, and then also Christ in his glory. But this veil was symbolic of Christ's flesh. It was when Christ's flesh was torn that the veil was torn. And he opened up the way into the Holy of Holies. And that's what the Hebrew writer is saying here. As the high priest would enter on the Day of Atonement into the Holy of Holies through the veil, so we too with confidence can enter into the Holy of Holies, that is, into the very presence of God in a deep abiding relationship with God the Father, because of the blood of Christ and also the flesh of Christ, which is the veil that opens up the way for us to draw near to the Father. And he says in verse 21, and since we have a great high priest over the house of God, we have a great high priest. We have a priest according to the order of Melchizedek, one who is not restricted by sin, not restricted by death, but one who is able to forever, eternally serve as our high priest and be the one through whom we can draw near. And he says in verse 22, let us draw near with a sincere heart in full assurance of faith, not being timid, not being afraid, as I'm sure the high priest was, because if he did anything wrong, he would be struck dead there on the Day of Atonement. We can go with boldness and confidence, not afraid, not timid, but bold, not because of anything that we are or anything that we can accomplish, but because we have the blood of Christ and we have this high priest. We have this new and living way, and so we can boldly come to God. But he says we have this full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. More allusions to this Day of Atonement. The blood was sprinkled on the mercy seat to purify the mercy seat, also in front of the mercy seat to purify the Holy of Holies, and also to make atonement for the people. Is also put upon the altar as well to purify it. But we've been sprinkled with not the blood of bulls and goats, but with the blood of Jesus Christ himself. And therefore we have been made pure and clean before God. And then it talks about the bodies being washed with pure water. That's what the high priest had to do. He had to wash his body in water before entering into the Holy of Holies. It was only when he did that that he was prepared to enter in. And not only did he wash himself before, but also after he left the Holy of Holies. But there was this washing of the body that was required in order to enter into the presence of God. And we have that as well. We've been washed with pure water. In other words, we've been made ready. We've been purified. We've been cleansed and ready to enter into the presence of God. He says, since we have all this, since we have everything prepared for us, we have everything that Aaron had or his descendants had, the high priest had, to enter into the Holy of Holies, but even better things than Aaron and his descendants had. Verse 23, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. Let's not be timid. Let's not be doubtful. Let's not shrink back and go back to where we came from. And in this particular case, to the Jewish system, the church might have been tempted to do, the ones that the Hebrew writer was speaking to, but us as well as maybe shrinking back and going back to the world or going back to our life before coming to Christ. No, we can go to God boldly with confidence. And not only that, we can help other people in the process. In verse 24, and let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. So we have this new and living way. We have all these precious promises and assurances. Now let's provoke one another to love and good deeds. That should be the outgrowth of this wonderful privilege that we have through Jesus Christ. He says in verse 25, not forsaking our own assembly together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. We as the church are the tabernacle. We, the church, are the temple, and we need to spend time in the temple, assembling with the temple, with the church, and utilizing that time to encourage one another and to help each other in their growth and in their experience of this new and living way. So as we do our reading today in Hebrews chapter 10, let's keep in mind this Day of Atonement. It seems to be emphasized here as the Hebrew writer kind of summarizes what he has spoken about so far. And let's be thankful that a new and living way has been opened up for us. We get to be like Aaron. We get to be like his descendants. We get to actually abide in the presence of God. And one day that will be fully realized. One day his glory, his presence will be fully manifested to us, and we will really see ourselves in his very presence. And that's a hope that we have. But even now today, we can enjoy the presence of God, an abiding relationship with him. We can draw near to him. We can hold fast to him. And we can not shrink back, but go forward in our spiritual walk, having the confidence of knowing that we have the blood of Christ. We have Christ as our high priest, and that we have entrance into the very holy of holies. So these are some things we can think about as we do our readings today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.